A homeless man, a forgotten name, a judge about to sign another case away, until memory struck like lightning. One whispered identity shattered the courthouse routine and reignited a buried truth. Witness the incredible moment justice finally remembered those it once erased. Mondays at the Franklin County Courthouse always began like a persistent drizzle, not fierce but cold, seeping into every crack of the weathered walls. Under the pale flicker of fluorescent lights, the long wooden benches in Courtroom 3 were packed with the weekend's arrested. Bar fights, reckless driving, minor infractions. No one truly paid attention to the faces passing by, blurred entries on an overloaded docket. Papers flipped steadily on the clerk's desk. Nearby, Deputy Cole Parker absent-mindedly tapped his fingers against the handle of his belt, his gaze sweeping the room in a mechanical rhythm. Only Judge Meredith Langford, perched solemnly atop the bench, maintained an unshakable composure. Another Monday morning, no different from any other. Next case, the clerk's voice called out, steady as a metronome. Case 247B. Most heads remained bowed over their phones. But when the defendant's doors swung open, Cole Parker frowned. The man who shuffled and looked different from the usual lot. A thick coat torn at the elbows, worn-out boots with socks poking through, haphazardly tied with strips of plastic. Dust clung to the tattered layers underneath. A grizzled gray beard obscured most of his face. But when he looked up, there was something striking in his eyes. Not the glassy stare of an addict or the frantic darting of the unstable, but a steady, clear gaze, calm and startlingly lucid. Toward the defense table, Cole prompted, his voice softer than usual. The man gave a slight nod, unhurried, unafraid, and made his way to the solitary wooden chair. He moved slowly, but not feebly, each step deliberate, as if he had long learned not to waste energy on meaningless motions. Judge Langford glanced down at the intake sheet before her. Just a single page, unlike the thick case file she was used to. The name was handwritten in a firm, deliberate script, a jarring contrast to his disheveled appearance. Charge: illegal camping on public land. Third offense within 12 months. Langford exhaled quietly. A familiar type. A transient, refusing shelter, stubbornly clinging to the margins. Another rusty cog in a justice system grown numb to its own grinding. "Please have a seat," she said, her voice steady and detached. He obeyed without a word, placing his calloused hands neatly on his lap, fingers loosely interlaced. In the heavy, stifling air of the overcrowded courtroom, under the harsh lighting that cast warped shadows across the wooden floor, his presence suddenly stood apart, like a foreign entity, a forgotten story that no one cared to hear anymore. Yet somehow, that silence itself pulled the entire room into a strange, collective breath. And deep within the recesses of her mind, Judge Meredith Langford felt something she hadn't experienced in all her long years behind the bench. Something monumental was quietly unfolding right before her eyes. Judge Langford's gaze dropped once more to the page in front of her, the pen already poised to sign the standard citation, just like countless others. "State your full name for the record," she recited mechanically, without looking up. A beat of silence passed. Then, from the defense table, the man slowly rose. No screech of a chair, no murmured permission, just a smooth, deliberate movement, so grounded that for a fleeting moment, it seemed as if gravity itself had grown heavier around him. He lifted his head, and those strange gray-blue eyes swept across the room, piercing, unflinching, cutting through the battered concrete walls as if they were made of paper. There was no smile, no defiance, no plea for sympathy, just an undeniable presence, still and weighty, like a declaration that needed no words. His voice broke the silence, gravelly low, yet sharp as if honed by endless, grinding years. "Caleb Ward." 2 syllables dropped into the courtroom like a slow, echoing drumbeat. Immediately, the murmurs, the clatter of keyboards, even the rustle of papers halted in midair. Several heads turned. The young prosecutor pressed his lips into a thin line. The clerk unconsciously tightened his grip on the folder he held. Only Meredith Langford remained motionless. She blinked once. Her hand clenched the pen so hard her knuckles turned white. That name, not a meaningless one. Caleb Ward. A name whispered behind locked doors by anyone who had ever served within the shadowy branches of national security during the darkest of times. A name bound to missions that never made it into the records, to sacrifices no one dared to officially acknowledge. 15 years ago, she had still been Meredith Young, a freshly minted attorney, handpicked to serve as an aide in a top-secret military tribunal at Fort Belvoir. A trial never mentioned in any newspaper, with no archived records, no trace left except in the memories of those present that day. And Meredith's memory had never faded. She remembered it vividly. The small, windowless courtroom, the guards in dark glasses standing motionless like statues, and the man seated behind the defendant's rail, with those same piercing gray-blue eyes that once carved straight through her heart. Caleb Ward, the central figure in an Operation America never officially acknowledged, Operation Silent Echo. A mission to rescue hostages from a war zone so classified that even its coordinates were wiped off the maps. A man who had carried out missions that even Congress dared not admit had existed. Rescue operations. Deep insertions into enemy territory. Life or death decisions made in seconds. In moments the world would never know had even happened. She remembered how he answered every question before that tribunal. No excuses, no pleas for mercy, only the bare truth, laid out with such unflinching sharpness that even the highest-ranking generals in attendance had bowed their heads. But when those missions ended, when those victories were folded into the National Security Secrets vault, Caleb Ward became a ghost. No pension, no honors, no medals pinned to flowery speeches, only silence and the gnawing loneliness that came with it. And now, he stood before her, clad in torn clothing, labeled nothing more than a homeless trespasser. A vein in Meredith's temple pulsed. She felt a sting behind her nose. For the first time in many years, the judge's cold, unshakable gaze faltered. Beneath the ripped jacket, beneath the dust of time and poverty, the essence of Caleb Ward could not be disguised. A quietude, not of surrender, but of a man who had seen the world for what it was and decided he owed it no explanations. In that moment, no one moved. The courtroom fell into an eerie silence, not from fear, nor from shock, but from a quiet reverence they couldn't quite explain. Meredith Langford set her pen down. The hand that had signed hundreds of cold, clinical judgments now trembled slightly beneath the sleeve of her robe. She was merely a small, helpless witness to something larger. A man who had once carried the fate of dozens on his shoulders, now discarded by the very nation he had once served without question. She knew then, today's hearing was no longer just another case. It was a reckoning, a reminder that some people, no matter how broken, no matter how forgotten, still carried within them a kind of honor that would never bend. A soft voice stirred her from her thoughts. "Your Honor, shall we proceed?" It was the young prosecutor, oblivious to the weight pressing down on the room. Meredith blinked, forcing the tidal wave of memory back into its cage. She nodded slightly to herself. No, she could not let this hearing slip past like the countless others. Meredith Langford placed the pen fully down, her hands clasping together on the bench, steadying herself for a decision far more important than mere procedure. She lifted her gaze, her voice calm and professional, but in the depths of her eyes, something had reignited. "Mr. Ward," she said, slow and deliberate, "this hearing will not proceed as usual." A ripple of murmurs swept through the gallery. Caleb Ward simply looked at her, without surprise, without expectation, as if he had always known a day like this would come. And in that moment, Meredith Langford understood. Her responsibility today was no longer to the system. It was to justice itself. The courtroom hung in a suffocating silence. Across the room, the young prosecutor shuffled his papers, uncertain how to respond to the clear break from protocol. "Your Honor," he said, voice faltering, "if we continue to delay, I must request that we proceed under standard procedures." Meredith cut him off coldly. "Standard procedure?" She repeated it, her voice laced with a hidden blade of steel. "You want to standardize injustice? You want to keep burying men like him beneath meaningless sentences?" The young prosecutor froze. A few whispers stirred among the gallery. Caleb Ward still did not move. He remained like a stone in a raging sea, unchanging, composed, waiting. Meredith drew in a deep breath. The time had come. She slowly turned to the court clerk. "Record in the minutes. This hearing is hereby suspended." Then she turned directly to Caleb Ward. "And effective immediately, this court orders a full review of Mr. Caleb Ward's military service records under the direct authority of the state judiciary." The entire courtroom seemed to stop breathing. But Meredith wasn't finished. She stood tall, hands braced on the bench, her gaze sweeping across every person in the room. "Because if this system can so easily forget the men who silently sacrificed to defend it," she said, her voice ringing like iron against stone, "then we no longer deserve to stand here today." A heavy silence settled over the room. In that weighted space, only the soft shuffle of papers and the shamed shifting of eyes could be heard. Caleb Ward stood calmly at the defense table, shoulders square, face still and solid, like an ancient stone monolith weathering 1,000 storms. No plea for mercy, no desperate gestures, only the silent presence of a man who had walked through places most of them couldn't even dare to imagine. Judge Meredith Langford stared at him for a long, steady moment, and then, as if reaching a final decision, she slowly removed the thin-rimmed glasses from the bridge of her nose. The entire courtroom held its breath. Carefully, she laid the glasses down on the bench. Then, with deliberate, unwavering hands, she pulled off her black judicial robe, the very symbol of authority she had worn for nearly 2 decades. The faint rustle of fabric whispered into the charged air, but the sound cracked across every chest in the room like a thunderclap. She folded the robe neatly, holding it tightly in both hands, as if preparing to return an honor she no longer felt worthy to carry. "This court," she said, her voice calm but ringing with undeniable force, "does not have the authority to judge a man like Caleb Ward." She turned to the court clerk. "Record in the minutes. All charges against Mr. Caleb Ward permanently dismissed. Records sealed. No trace left behind." The clatter of typing echoed through the courtroom, shaky and uneven. The prosecutor, face flushed deep red, shot up from his seat. "Your Honor, this is a blatant violation of due process." But Meredith only turned her head, her gaze sharp as a blade tempered by fire and tears. "If you truly understood justice," she answered, "you would have stood up with me today." The prosecutor choked on his words and fell silent. Meredith stepped down from the bench, her heels striking the wooden floor with a steady, resolute rhythm. As she passed Caleb Ward, she paused for a moment. Their eyes met, one last time, and between them passed a promise that needed no words. "I owed you, and today, I have repaid that debt with my own honor." No one tried to stop her. No one could, because in that moment, everyone knew justice had been served, not through the letter of the law, but through the spirit of honor. The grand doors of the courtroom swung open, and the light from outside poured in like a torrent, cloaking her in an invisible robe of freedom. Not freedom from the law, but freedom from compromise. And so, Meredith Langford, Chief Judge of Franklin County Court, walked out, leaving behind not just an unfinished trial, but a chilling reminder. Sometimes, to truly serve justice, you must have the courage to step down from your own throne. As the heavy courtroom doors closed behind Meredith Langford, an eerie, almost sacred stillness settled over the room. For a few long seconds, no one moved. Caleb Ward remained seated alone between the 2 long rows of benches, the sunlight from the high windows cascading down upon him like a silent halo. A few court officials bowed their heads. Some of the attendees, even if they didn't fully understand what they had witnessed, instinctively knew they had just seen something so rare that most people would never encounter it again in a lifetime. And then, as if guided by some invisible current, people began to stand. First, the old police officer sitting by the wall, his uniform faded and threadbare from the passage of years. He rose slowly, his posture solemn, like at a memorial service. Then the court clerk, his hands still hovering over the typewriter, trembled slightly as he pulled away from the keys and silently stood. A young prosecutor, the same one who had earlier raised his voice in objection, slowly closed his case file, his expression contemplative, and respectfully rose to his feet, as if offering an apology through silence. One, then two, then five people. The entire courtroom quietly stood, without a single word spoken, without any command given. There was no applause, no grand declarations. Only people who had, knowingly or unknowingly, ignored the existence of men like Caleb, now standing in solemn tribute to a living monument they had nearly overlooked. The scraping of chairs echoed throughout the room, not in chaos, but in a slow, steady rhythm, like the drumbeat of an invisible army bowing before a hero they were only now beginning to recognize. Caleb Ward, the man in the worn-out boots and the battered coat, remained standing there, silent. No swagger, no pretense, no victorious grin. He simply gave a small, steady nod, like a soldier acknowledging the command of a leader he respected. Not a single word was spoken, yet respect filled the room like a rising tide, seeping into every crack of the old wooden walls, flowing into every breath taken. In the back row, a young law student clutched her hands tightly to her chest, tears welling up in her eyes though she couldn't explain why. A traffic officer, who once thought himself hardened after 15 years of witnessing life's harshest realities, closed his eyes and bowed his head. Even the chief prosecutor, his silver hair neatly cropped and his suit crisply pressed, removed his cap and held it firmly against his chest as if saluting a fallen flag. No speeches were made. No proclamations were given. Only silence. The only language pure enough to honor a warrior returning from lands that no official map had ever dared to chart. Caleb Ward slowly rose, walking down the aisle between the rows of those now standing. His worn boots made a soft, steady sound against the weathered wooden floor. With each step, he erased the invisible distance between past and present, between silent acts of valor and the unjust oblivion they had been met with. His battered coat fluttered slightly as he walked, and his boots whispered across the floor. Yet in every footfall, there was a steadfastness that neither time nor forgetfulness could ever defeat. He did not bow. He did not smile. He simply walked on, quietly passing through a corridor of people, now standing not for the man they had once judged, but for the hero their country still owed a silent, eternal debt. When the courtroom door closed behind him, the sound etched itself into the air like a silent vow. That men like him, whether or not their names were carved into stone, would live on in the memories of those who possessed enough conscience to bow their heads. Outside Riverside Courthouse, the winter light bathed the sidewalks crisp and cold. Caleb Ward pulled up the frayed collar of his coat and descended the worn stone steps. No one paid him any mind, just another drifter leaving court. Cars rushed past, clerks hurried by with coffee cups in hand. The city kept spinning, as if the hearing just minutes ago had been nothing more than an invisible speck of dust. But Caleb knew there were other eyes watching. It was impossible to miss. A black military SUV parked nearby. Unmarked, its windows tinted so dark they mirrored the pale winter sun like polished glass. Caleb paused, his eyes narrowing warily. The rear door of the SUV popped open with a soft click. Out stepped a man in a plain military uniform. No insignias, no rank. Only the kind of rigid posture that could stand against any storm. The man was at least 2 decades younger than Caleb, yet in his eyes lingered a weariness that far surpassed his age. A faint scar ran from his right temple down across his cheekbone, a silent testament to battles fought and survived. The soldier walked directly toward him, stopping just a few feet away. He raised his hand in a sharp salute, solemn as a ceremony with no witnesses. "Mr. Ward," he said, his voice low and firm. "Permission to escort you." Caleb tilted his head slightly, his icy blue gaze sweeping the young man's face. There was no threat, no coercion, only waiting. "Who sent you?" Caleb asked, his voice rough as stone dragged across sandpaper. The soldier answered without hesitation. "Those who still owe you, and those who are about to need you, one last time." A breeze swept through, scattering scraps of paper across the pavement, punctuating the heavy silence that followed. Caleb stared deep into the man's eyes, where there were no orders, only urgency. "Times have changed," the soldier continued, lowering his voice. "Old secrets are being dug up. Old blood debts are about to come due. And this time, we don't have the luxury of running." Caleb tightened his grip around the makeshift string, replacing his shoelace, a habit from long ago, each time he stood at a crossroads where retreat was not an option. "I disappeared for a reason," he muttered under his breath. "And this country still exists today because men like you once chose not to disappear," the soldier replied swiftly, his eyes unblinking. A heavy breath passed between them. Across the wide, open courtyard, only the distant blare of car horns and the whisper of the wind filled the silence, urging them onward. At last, Caleb moved, slow but certain. He stepped forward, passing the young soldier, heading straight toward the waiting SUV. No spoken agreement, no nod of consent, but that single step said everything. The soldier opened the door for him, then slipped quietly into the driver's seat without another word. The engine rumbled low, and the vehicle pulled away from the curb, merging into the chaotic river of life, none of whom realized what they had just witnessed. In the rearview mirror, Caleb Ward took one final glance back at Franklin County Courthouse. The building stood tall, a symbol of justice, and yet it was within those very walls that history had once again bowed its head in silent recognition of a man no one dared officially acknowledge. This time, he returned, not for honor, not for revenge, but for a debt owed to those who were never permitted to exist in the official records. Inside the SUV, the air seemed heavier than the bulletproof glass encasing them. The young soldier gripped the steering wheel in silence, occasionally glancing at the rearview mirror, as if afraid that if he looked away too long, Caleb might simply vanish into thin air. Caleb leaned back against the seat, his gaze drifting out the tinted window, watching rows of houses, lampposts, and small storefronts blur past. A city still living, still innocently believing that freedom was a default, something that cost no blood, no sacrifice. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to push away the sharp pang rising in his chest, the ache of a man returning to a world he was meant to have left behind forever. The SUV turned down a deserted side road, where concrete buildings slumbered under the sickly yellow glow of old sodium streetlights. No signs, no voices, only the wind murmuring through cracked walls and rusted doorways. They pulled up before a massive metal gate. There were no markings save for a tiny string of numbers etched into the top right corner, 47B. The soldier punched a code into the control panel. The gate groaned, slowly swinging open to reveal a sloping path descending underground. Caleb didn't ask questions. He merely tightened his grip on the seat handle, feeling every fiber of muscle in his body draw taut again. Like old guitar, strings finally touched after years of silence. The SUV plunged into the underground tunnel, pale yellow lights streaking past on either side. When they stopped, in front of them stood a plain steel room, but inside was an entirely different world. Strategic maps, satellite feed displays, classified documents encrypted under layers of security protocols. A group of people, dressed in plain clothes with eyes sharp as knives, was already waiting. No introductions were necessary. They all knew exactly who he was. Caleb stepped out of the vehicle, the worn soles of his boots striking the concrete floor with a resonant thud. Every major confrontation of his life had always begun in silence, just like this. An older man, his hair silver and cropped in a military style, stepped forward. No smile, no empty formalities. "Welcome back, Mr. Ward," he said. Caleb gave a slight nod. He didn't ask what the mission was, didn't demand explanations, didn't request assurances. There was only one question. How many are we losing? The commander hesitated for a brief moment, then answered quietly. Too many. Caleb inhaled deeply, the cold tang of steel and the sweat of centuries mixing in the air, a scent so familiar it almost smelled like home. He brushed his fingers lightly against the frayed leather strap of his watch, the one gift from a comrade who had never made a home. And without another word, Caleb strode forward toward the command table, where the glowing electronic maps flickered under the dim lights. Not everyone understands why men like him never truly retire. They simply, quietly return when their country calls. No glory, no medals, only a loyalty that asks for no recognition. The metal gate behind him slammed shut with a heavy clank, as if severing the final thread binding him to the outside world. Caleb Ward, the Shadow Warrior, had returned, not for himself, but for the things only those who had sacrificed in silence could ever fully understand. The next morning, the corridors of Franklin County Courthouse were unusually quiet. The clocks ticked steadily on the dark wood-paneled walls, but no one seemed to notice. Judge Meredith Langford stepped through the large glass doors, the heavy black robe neatly folded in her arms. She wasn't wearing it today. Not anymore. In her left hand, she carried a thin sealed envelope, bearing a single line of handwritten text. To the court administration. The clerk, a young woman with neatly tied brown hair, looked up from her stack of files as she saw Meredith approach. She immediately stood up, concern flashing across her face. "Judge Langford, is there anything I can assist you with?" she asked. Meredith smiled, a rare, genuine smile that warmed from deep within, so different from her usual stern expression. "No need, Anna," she said gently. "I'm just here to deliver one final task." She placed the envelope on the desk. Carefully, decisively, Anna looked at the envelope, then back at Meredith, her eyes filled with confusion. "Will you be coming back?" she asked hesitantly. Meredith shook her head softly. Her voice was low and steady. "There is justice this seat can never reach, and there are vows that don't need gavels or verdicts to fulfill." Anna stood frozen, the weight of those words hanging heavily between the two women, 2 generations, 2 different positions, but sharing the same heartbeat for what was right. Meredith gave a small nod and turned away, her footsteps firm, without a hint of hesitation. She felt no regret, no sorrow. Behind her, Anna hurriedly picked up the envelope. As the letter tilted slightly under the sunlight, streaming through the window, she caught sight of the faintly printed words inside. Letter of resignation, effective immediately. When Meredith Langford stepped out of the courthouse, there were no drums, no music, no farewell procession. Only the March winds swept across the marble steps, carrying away the old memories of trials where, deep down, she knew she had ruled according to the law, but against what was truly right. No one understood. Judge Langford, once shortlisted for a high federal judgeship with a spotless career, suddenly walked away from her position at the height of her power. Rumors flared up like wildfire in the wind. Some speculated she was entangled in a scandal. Others whispered that she had been diagnosed with a terminal illness. Still others murmured that she had succumbed to political pressure from above. But Meredith Langford granted no interviews. She quietly packed her belongings, said goodbye to a few trusted colleagues with short handshakes and silent smiles. The eastern sky gradually cleared, and rays of sunlight spilled over the bustling streets. Meredith took a deep breath, lifted her head high, and walked straight toward the road opening up before her. From now on, she would seek a different kind of justice. A justice not written in statutes, not stamped on verdicts, but alive in how one human being chose to treat those the world had decided to forget. A kind of justice, silent, but far more enduring than any judgment she had ever delivered. 1 week later, on an ordinary Monday morning, people arriving at Franklin County Courthouse encountered something unusual. A new bronze plaque had been installed. No announcement, no dedication ceremony, no candles, no flowers. Only 2 maintenance workers in gray uniforms quietly mounting a simple plaque on the large wall in the east hallway, right by the entrance to courtroom 3, where Judge Meredith Langford had once presided. The plaque was not large, nor ornately decorated, just raw, unpolished brass, with deep, simple engraving that carried its own solemn dignity. When the morning light poured through the glass doors, the words stood out in sharp relief. For those who serve where history chose not to remember. For those who bore the burden a nation quietly enjoyed. We know you were there, and we owe you everything. Beneath the inscription, there were no names, no ranks, no titles, only a small, sunken emblem, the image of a torch burning against the wind, a flame that would never go out. Lawyers, staff members, even unfamiliar defendants passing by would pause, read, and fall silent. No one knew for sure who had ordered the plaque to be placed. Some whispered that Judge Langford herself had signed off on it before stepping down. Others murmured that a mysterious man, tall, wearing an old military coat, had silently overseen its installation in the early hours of that morning. But no one confirmed it, and no one needed to, because even without knowing the full story, everyone could feel one undeniable truth. There are debts of honor that time cannot erase. There are those who fought and sacrificed, not for glory, not for reward, but out of loyalty to the very best that remains in this world. The story of Caleb Ward, of Judge Meredith Langford, and of countless other nameless souls did not need to be shouted from the pages of history books. It lived quietly in every footstep that passed that hallway, in every silent nod toward the bronze plaque. An eternal tribute from those who were protected to those who chose to protect, asking for nothing in return. There are those who defend freedom whom the world will never know. They need no medals, no titles, only a quiet promise. I am still here,